Hello, everybody, and welcome to the WastED webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Garnet. I go by he, him pronouns, and this is the WastED webinar. This is episode 7. Before we introduce our guest, I'd like to do a quick treaty acknowledgement. I'm on Treaty 6, and I believe most of us are. That is the traditional land of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Nakota Sioux, and many urban Indigenous people, as well as other Indigenous nations. Some exciting news for folks that are in Edmonton. The Cahuan Cree Nation and the city of Edmonton has officially started discussions to explore Edmonton's first urban reserve. That's exciting news for us, and we'll post that in the show notes as well as in the chat if anybody wants to hear more about that. And something that's important to recognize in a discussion like the one we're having today is a lot of what we're talking about is caring for the land in ways that are unfortunately less common in our society. And it's important to remember that Indigenous people have been tending to the land for centuries, and much of what we learn in regenerative farming and permaculture and all those related fields is learned from Indigenous peoples, and we're very grateful to them for being the knowledge holders and for sharing that with us. With that grounding, I would love to introduce our guest, Becky Doherty of Stonepost Farms. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us. I'm very excited to have a chat with you. Maybe just as some context to get us started, if you could introduce the farm and how it got started and what type of farm it is.
Absolutely. So Stonepost Farms, my husband and I co-own and operate it. We got started in 2016 when we bought our farm. We're located about an hour and a half west of Edmonton, just off the Yellowhead. John had always dreamed of being a full-time farmer, and we'd lived in Lethbridge. We moved up near towards Edmonton on an acreage, and he started getting the itch to farm once we started having kids. And we spent about 2 years looking for a farm and finally landed on this one. And so, yeah, we've been out here for about 5 years. And our focus of how we wanted our farm to be was similar to that of farms like a century ago, where it was kind of a self-sustaining unit. And that's why we have such a wide-ranging array of products, essentially. So what we focus on is we've got grass-finished beef. We do pasture-raised pork, chicken, turkey, free-range eggs. We have naturally grown produce as well as unpasteurized honey. And then we work with another farm to bring in grass-finished lamb as well. So we've got quite a bit of stuff. Most people call us crazy, and we probably are a little bit, but we really wanted to raise our kids on the farm. Out in the country. I grew up in a country, small setting out in BC, and John was Southern Alberta, and land up here was a lot cheaper. So that's kind of how we ended up here. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. And how much land do you have? And give us an idea of scale, and also scale from when you started to where you're operating now.
Absolutely. So we bought a quarter section 5 years ago. So that's about 160 acres. And then 2 years ago, we purchased an adjoining quarter. So we are now at 320 acres. And then we rent out about another 100 acres for hay. And then we're looking at additional pasture opportunities in the area. So kind of slowly expanding where we can.
That's huge. Yeah, that is a very large farm. That, and with all the different varieties of products that you offer, that's got to be a ton of work. Is it just yourself and your husband, or do you have other help on the farm as well?
So it's been myself and my husband for the last 4 years. This year is our first year. We actually did get help. We joined with the Young Agrarians, and we hired an apprentice through their program, and that's been kind of a game changer for us. We obviously have a lot of friends and family that come out and help us. My mom would come out and childmind. John's dad's actually going to help us come out and do a bunch of butchering for our on-farm slaughter this fall. So definitely we've got support, but yeah, it's mainly the two of us.
Wow. That is a ton of work. Wonderful. And so a lot of what you do is based on ethical and regenerative farming practices. Can you elaborate more on what exactly those practices are and how it changes your relationship with food?
Absolutely. So when we first started farming, we had never even heard of regenerative farming, to be honest. John had kind of gone down the rabbit hole of YouTube and started watching lots of different videos around, like how you can make a farm profitable, right down to like market gardening and permaculture. And then kind of once we started getting going and really diving into some of those speakers and what they're talking about with rotational grazing and stuff like that. And that's kind of where the regenerative agriculture kind of stood out for us and really fit well for us. We both have backgrounds in environmental science and geography, so we already kind of had a lot of the knowledge of how the environment works, and so it was easy for us to kind of really connect the dots. We both worked with soil, so we really understood the nutrients and all of that kind of thing as well. And when they started talking about, building up your organic matter, water storage, nutrient dense, and all of those kind of things, it really just clicked for us. And then once we started kind of implementing these practices and understanding how it really did make a difference, that really kind of kickstarted like all the different other facets that we work with on and wanting to improve and really steward the land and make a difference.
And could you, is regenerative farming the same as like grass-fed meat? Is it the same as sustainable farming? What's the, like some of the definition of regenerative?
So sustainable farming, if you think of what the word sustainable means, it means to sustain. So you keep going. So you have to put in what you take out. Regenerative means you want to regenerate, so you want to increase. So you're putting in more than you're taking out, in a very simplistic frame of mind. Grass finish doesn't necessarily mean that it's regenerative. You can grass finish just as long as they're out in a pasture, but it's the management of that pasture that kind of determines whether you're on the regenerative end of things or not. So for us, when we're thinking of regenerative practices, we look at is what we call rotational grazing. And so that just means we have smaller areas that we group our cows or our pigs in, and then we move them around often. What that allows us to do is it concentrates their manures in their urine, which acts as fertilizer. They trample down the grass, creating organic matter. We don't leave them long enough so that they overeat and eat down the grass too far, which is very important. And so we keep them moving, and that really helps to build our pastures really nicely. And then, you can have grass finished and they just raise in a large field without any kind of management. So a lot of it's based on how you manage your cattle and your pastures on that frame of things. So yeah, it's more in practices you do versus the food that you're selling and the terms that go with the food, unfortunately.
Awesome. I for something happened with my Zoom feed there and I dipped out momentarily, but it sounds like you covered everything really well. So I'm going to assume that regenerative farming is a-okay, and we have a firm understanding of that. So thank you for doing that. And in doing that and in researching and learning more about regenerative farming, how has that changed your relationship with food and how you relate to the food you grow, but also the food that you see elsewhere?
It's really made us look at the food system and like see where it's essentially kind of broken. And this pandemic has really highlighted a lot of those areas. And it, like with waste and stuff, when you're buying kind of, and I wouldn't say like regenerative, but even more local, like local is better than regional or international. And then regenerative is probably your next step down from local if you kind of want to think of it on that kind of trajectory. We've really thought twice about what we buy in the stores and try and produce more of our own food, or really try and source out better food for, whether it's something we can't produce, we'll try and find a local producer that does it similar to us, because to us that means a lot more, because it's got that connection. They respect things the same way we do. Yeah.
And what are some of the benefits that might be more like nutritional or environmental for regenerative farming and local farming?
So yeah, it's been said for using like permaculture and regenerative techniques that the food's a lot more nutrient dense. Things like higher omegas, higher vitamin D content, that sort of thing. There's not a ton of studies out there to prove that, so it's still slightly controversial. It's kind of on our list eventually to hopefully get some funding so we can do a little bit of that analysis, because it's quite costly to send samples in and have that done. Environmentally, it's huge. Like just on, say, weed management, you have to spray, and you spray like every 3 years you spray down certain weeds, because the county kind of mandates it so they can reduce the spread of weeds. And by rotational grazing, we've seen our weed population decrease every single year just based on grazing techniques versus having to spray it. So you have things like that, increasing organic matter, which also helps to break down compaction in your soil, which increases your water infiltration. So we're not seeing a ton of runoff. We get the water to stay on the land when we need it, which is important in times like this year where we had drought. And then you just have better nutrient retention. So if you have better nutrient retention, your grasses or your vegetables or what have you that are produced are healthier and better flavor, more nutrient dense, etc. And it just keeps going.
Awesome. Yeah. And do you hear that from your customers? Do they notice the like the taste difference, and do they feel better eating those foods?
100%. Yeah. A lot of people, like first time people that, say come and buy our eggs or buy some of our produce, the first thing they say when they come back is they can't believe like the difference in the flavor. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's got to be very rewarding, putting in all that work and then having individuals that eat that food come back to you as the farmer and tell you how much it means.
It keeps us going, that's for sure.
Yeah. How about in terms of food waste? Is there food waste at Stonepost? And do you know how much and what's done with it?
So we try and reduce it as much as possible. When we're looking at our garden, anything that's coming out of our garden that we're not selling, whether it's, say the plant to a potato, you can't really sell that. Right. It's really not something we can repurpose, or weeds or whatnot. We compost everything. So we've got composting bins that we're kind of cycling through. And when everything's kind of broken down, those then go back out on our gardens. Same thing goes for manures. We clean out our calving shelters, our chicken barn, where the layers are, and we compost those as well. Again, those go out on the gardens and feed back. So we're reducing the need for input for outside fertilizers, and then we don't have any waste that way. In terms of other waste, like we do have a little bit with say like baler twine on our hay bales. We try and repurpose that, but a lot of times that ends up getting recycled. Other than that, those are the majority we're able to reuse. Our household stuff, everything gets either composted, goes to the pigs or the chickens. And literally the only thing we're throwing out is the packaging of food. And we also try and limit packaging on our CSAs and stuff to a minimum, or at least reusable packaging. And we find our customers really value that, being able to, give back the packaging so we can repurpose it. It's not just a single use item. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Could you expand a little more on CSA and what that means?
Absolutely. So CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And what it is it's an opportunity for people to invest in the farm. And so kind of some of the common structures we have, we do 3 different types of CSAs. We have a meat one, an egg one, and a vegetable one. So our meat and egg CSAs, those we have 4 different programs a year. Each of them are 12 weeks long, and you prepay up front. And then every week you just come and pick up, whether it's a dozen eggs or a certain amount of meat. for meat, we'll bring a roast or chicken breasts and sausage. And every week we try and switch it up so you get a wide variety. And then this summer, we also do a 12-week vegetable CSA, and same kind of thing. You pay in the spring. And then the summer, every week you're getting a big basket full of vegetables and kind of, yeah, whatever we've got seasonally harvested on the farm. So this week happened to be, literally today is our last drop-off day in Edmonton. So wrap up the season. So yeah, but it's a really nice way to support your farmer, helps us cover our input costs, which are always at the beginning of the year. And then, yeah, it's really nice way to get involved and know your farmer, know your food.
Yeah, awesome. I signed up for a CSA, and I think I have 2 more. I have a pickup tomorrow and 1 next week, and I'm then I'll have to go back to, I don't know, source my food elsewhere, and I'm not looking forward to making those decisions again. The CSA is such a lovely option. Have you ever heard from your customers that using all that food is a challenge in terms of how they are able to make use of all the foods in the CSA box?
It can be a challenge because we also grow some uncommon stuff that you don't typically see in the store. This year we didn't do as great a job of it as we typically do, but we'll try and do a monthly newsletter where we provide some recipes and some ideas on how to use some of those vegetables, as well as storage tips and that. And then we also have like a pretty open conversation with customers when they come and pick up. They're pretty comfortable just asking you, like, what do I do with a patty pan squash? And, you know, what is this? And so we'll email them recipes or that kind of thing. So we definitely like to keep very open communication with our customers that way. And yeah, I think a lot of them have started to appreciate that, and it kind of challenges them to kind of get outside their comfort zone. So
yeah, I certainly enjoy experimenting with how to make use of all the foods in my CSA box. That being said, it's a bit of a privilege to be able to have the time to cook food and to have that knowledge as well. How about on the other end of the CSA, if you grow more food or less food than the CSA requires, how do you balance that?
So we do run 2 markets a week. So kind of anything that's extra that we aren't able to push off onto the next week, we'll take to market. We also have a couple restaurants that we work with, and they have a bit of an interest in kind of getting essentially some of the leftover stuff, and it kind of challenges them to create some specials that they can utilize that with, or we're eating it. And, you know, we might be sauteing and freezing it or whatnot. So kind of depends on what it is, the volume of it, and usually doesn't go to waste. And if it does, it's going to chickens, pigs, or to the compost. Yeah.
Very cool. What are the restaurants you work with?
Right now we work with Olive Bistro and Lounge out in Jasper. And then we're working on a few other connections right now to this time of year, due to COVID, has been a real challenge. And for restaurants, it's, kind of doesn't work that well right now with all the restrictions in place. So we're hoping to reestablish that soon.
Yeah, totally. It reminds me of our Leftovers has a program called A New Upcycling. So when we get donations that we can't find a service agency for, we'll upcycle with local businesses that might be turning them into beer or cookies or donut toppings or such. And that's awesome to hear that you're working with restaurants and they're able to be flexible and challenge themselves to make specials. So yeah, that's awesome. Would love to support those restaurants.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. Last month, when we were chatting with our guests from the U of A, we were talking about how shortening the supply chain can reduce the amount of food wasted. Can you speak about that and maybe other ways that sourcing food locally reduces food waste?
Yeah, so we were part of a program called Loop, which is a great program. It connects farmers to grocery stores, and essentially anything that's expired, they give it to the farmer, and instead of going to the dump, and they're able to use it. A good program. It didn't really work for us, just more or less with all the labor involved, but it really opened our eyes in terms of like how much food is wasted. And definitely by shortening that, like when it gets to like the step before the grocery store is your distribution. And so when they're in the distribution centers, if it's within a week of expiry, they have to get rid of that entire pallet. So you've got not only the grocery store waste, the distribution waste, anything that might have spoiled or whatnot on the truck itself. And there's probably a distribution center before that. So all these points that you could get rid of by, the farmer brings it in to the store or to wherever. And so right there, you're limiting. I don't even want to know how much waste. Like we've picked up trailer loads from a distribution center in 1 week of just oranges. So you've kind of got things like that. When you buy local, a lot of stuff is the packaging is quite a bit reduced. So you don't have as much of that happening too, which again, reduces a lot of waste. And it seems kind of when you're buying more local, they have a better grasp on how much they need to make. They're not making a huge excess hoping to sell it. Like they're making it to sell out. So you also have that kind of happening. So there's a lot of ways where, waste could be reduced by going a lot more local. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, certainly. Loop is a very interesting program. We have a couple of leftovers volunteers who will pick up a loop order for their farm, and then they'll sort it and donate some to a charity and take the rest home to their animals. But that's, like you say, that's a lot of work to sort that. And then even the stuff that you take home to your animals, you have to open the packages and do stuff with. And yeah, I was talking with one farmer and he said, it's like a day and a half work to deal with a loop order because of all the packaging, or in part because of the packaging, but also the volume.
Yeah, it was, just too much for us. And the garbage that it produced was, it really, definitely that made us think twice, like about like the whole system and how it all works. It's, something else.
Yeah. I'm curious, I wonder if, because I know the Edmonton Food Bank works really well with a lot of the major distributors and larger grocery chains. I wonder if they have food rescue programs set up with all the major distributors, and maybe afterwards we'll chat about the ones that you're familiar with and see if we can tag them down and see if they're on the food bank's list, and if not, start rescuing some of that food as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, would love to chat about that. So another perspective that I'd love to grab from you is, what are some major challenges or barriers in sustainability and food security in Edmonton and surrounding areas?
Yes, so if I look at more of on the meat side of things for us and many of the producers in the area, is having an abattoir, which essentially is a slaughterhouse that does all the butchering and packaging and everything, is having enough of those and big enough capacity. COVID has been a really big challenge for us on that front, and for every other producer I know in the area. Long wait times, like some producers are waiting 6 to 12 months to book in animals. We've seen our butcher dates being pushed back, and when the dates get pushed back, then that's product availability we don't have at markets or for CSA and things like that. So like that's been a huge challenge for us, and there's just not enough of them in the area. We've got one poultry producer, I think there's two actually, processing plants in the kind of west central area of Alberta. And then only about a handful of processing plants for other meats in the area as well. And they're all booked to the brim. So it's not simply like, hey, can I slide in a pig or a beef, in 2 weeks? You're waiting months and months and months. So that one's been a huge challenge.
Why do you think that is? Why is there a shortage of those organizations?
It's a lot of work. I know they have a lot of staffing issues. And then it's a big investment. Like they're multi-million-dollar facilities, and it's a very small profit margin, and it's hard work. It's a lot of hard work. We're bringing in, there's bison coming in, beef, pork, and these aren't light animals. And although they do have like hooks and conveyor belt systems, like it is very manual work. There are some I think Olds College has a butcher program. I'm not sure. I'm sure Nate and SAIT probably do as well. But yeah, it's kind of a bit of a lost art. There's not a lot of new people coming into it, especially on the processor, like the slaughtering end. And also there's a shortage of inspectors in the area too. So there's certified inspectors that go to each one of these plants, and there's just not enough of them to also cover all of them. So they're all fighting for dates to get inspectors in. All of our meat has to be inspected to sell. So it's, yeah, that in itself has been a big challenge. So
That's not something I would expect.
yeah.
Anything else to add that in terms of barriers to continuing what you do in food security, sustainability?
I think a lot of the barriers is just, it's a bit of a lost art, and it's intimidating to get into. Like, anyone can start a garden. You live in an apartment, you could start little pots. You can have indoor gardens, lots of people do, and just simply even just grow your own lettuce or your own herbs and stuff like that. So it's easy enough to do, but it's intimidating to actually, go out and do it. But it's there. And then a lot of it's to know how to do what with those foods. And I find that's another big challenge for people is, how do you cook these foods? How do you use leftovers? How do you preserve food? People oftentimes don't have anywhere to preserve the food, whether it's freezer space or shelf space or whatnot too. So there's kind of, a multitude of different aspects of that.
Yeah, and that leads to greater food waste as well when you don't know how to deal with those things.
Andrew's going to join us.
Hi.
Hey, Andrew, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, my name's Garnet. I'm the city coordinator for leftovers in Edmonton, and I understand you're the Young Agrarians apprentice.
Yeah, so I've been
Awesome.
here for about 2 months now, and I just help out with pretty much everything around here.
Cool. And what have you been doing just now? You're in the garden?
Yeah, so I was just finishing up the evening chores, feeding all the animals, the pigs, the turkeys, collecting eggs, and but before that I was in the garden and I was picking beets and radishes, potatoes, and washing them all up and getting them ready for our CSA packages.
Awesome. Sounds like wholesome and challenging work.
Yeah.
Farming in essence. Yeah. So we're just getting to more like what our community and our and individuals can do to reduce food waste, and maybe let's start at the community level and more of a societal perspective. In what can we do to reduce food waste? What are some of the low hanging fruit?
There's lots of things. Like one of the things, like the largest crop in North America is the front lawn. And for really no reason. It's prime real estate to be able to grow food. And a lot of times, like in the communities, 50 plus years back is, certain families would grow certain things and then they'd all come together and collectively share those, do big group gatherings where they would preserve things or, prep and freeze them and that kind of thing. And I feel like that side of things has kind of been lost. We do it a little more out here. Like we'll all get together and, do pickles for an entire day and make a big batch of pickles that we jar and we put in our cold room. And, there's 5 families that do it and we all split and take them home. Things like in our actual communities themselves, we have park spaces that again are manicured lawns. Why not have, kind of, food forests and, perennial fruit bearing bushes and that sort of things. People can come and pick that. And again, preserving and that sort of thing. So there's lots of things we could do as a community. There's community gardens, which there's a lot of those happening. But they're fairly small, and I know there's a lot of challenges depending on how they're structured. So, doing more of that sort of thing, I think would go a long ways. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so people think it's impossible, but it really isn't. It's there's so many things you can do, even just like even like a small improvement or like a small like garden, or even having a few plants to take care of, then you really start having that relationship with whatever you're nurturing, essentially.
So I'm hearing like definitely a common theme is coming out is this like idea of food literacy and relationship with food. And one of the key proposals is to just start somewhere. And and then 10 years you're running a farm and on a webinar. Yeah.
It happens so fast.
I never had a green thumb growing up, so.
Are there other young agrarians? Maybe let's go there briefly. What is Young Agrarians, Andrew? If you could give us a brief introduction.
Yeah, so Young Agrarians is a small apprenticeship program. It's mainly based in the prairies. So there's different sections for each province. So I'm in the Alberta province, obviously. And there's about a dozen farms that apply to have an apprentice for the summer. And and then the apprentices, we meet each other often, and we go on farm tours to each other's farms. So we learn not only like what I've been learning here, but I get to learn what every other apprentice all over the province has been learning. And these farms are really very diverse. You know, you have some farms that work with bees or just seeds, and then you have ones like urban farms. I went to a few farms in Calgary, like downtown Calgary, just these little plots that, you know, showing that this is what you can do with such little space. And it's very impressive setup. They have their own CSA members and everything.
That sounds awesome. And from what I've heard from yourself and also my exposure to Young Agrarians elsewhere, it's like a really valuable resource for young folks interested in learning about food literacy and farming. And are there other resources that you might recommend to people who are interested in growing more food and preserving more food and cooking more food? Any favorites?
Oh man, there's a long list, but YouTube really, they have everything. But I'll literally go on, just even Google and be like, okay, what do you do with patty pans? I want to do patty pans in a stir fry, and throw that in there, and you'd be amazed at the results you get. And so we've been challenging ourselves to be a little more experimental and kind of cook outside of our comfort zone and cook a little bit more with some of the stuff from the garden. We tend to sell most of our stuff. It's kind of sad. But yeah, trying to like expand our horizons even with cooking. And I just go on the internet and look for a recipe that speaks to me. And yeah, they're out there. Some neat people to follow. Like Curtis Stone is an urban farmer out of BC, and he's got some really interesting stuff. And he's kind of a neat one to follow. There's lots of local farms in the area that are really fascinating to follow. There's Backwoods Buffalo Ranch. They're actually just north of us, about half hour. And they've got a YouTube channel, and she's pretty active on social media, and they post a ton of stuff, whether it's recipes or the way they do things. And there's lots of other farms that kind of do little bits and pieces like that, and those ones are actually kind of the coolest to be following. So hit up Instagram and start looking at Alberta farms and see what's out there.
That sounds great. Anything to add to that, Andrew?
Yeah, just to add on to that. It's a very like close-knit community with all the farmers. You know, you follow one page on Instagram, and then like next thing you know, you're following like 10 different farms, and they're all doing their own piece for this grander puzzle. But personally, I've read books by Joel Salatin and Weston A. Price and Sandor Ellis Katz. Very good books on not only farming, but also our relationship with food and diet and fermentation too. It's a big thing out here as well.
Awesome. And if we're looking to like the what we've been talking about now is how your farm works and how you've grown, and then also the ways that individuals can get involved. How about if we're looking to have farms like yours and food growing like yours take over our food system? What are the barriers to scaling that to take over?
Oh, that's $1 million question right there. And it really depends on the scale of farming you want to do. Like for us, because like we're into cattle, which is kind of the main reason why we have so much land and need so much land. You know, if you're going down that basis, you know, money. It always comes down to money. Land's starting to get really expensive. It's increased even since we've moved out here, and kind of continues to be the problem. This year, another big challenge with that is feed. So financial is definitely one of the biggest barriers. But one of the neat things actually with young agrarians, and they're working on expanding it more into Alberta, but they do it really well in BC, is they have like a land matching program. And so it's kind of for people who are trying to retire out of farming, but don't just want to sell their farm to anyone. And they kind of bring someone in to mentor them and kind of help them take over the farm, sort of thing. So there are different options like that available. But other than that, it's kind of just like jumping in and figuring it out. We learned a lot of lessons the hard way, but we've sat and followed a lot of different farms. We continually go to conferences, we go to webinars, we network with people. Like, you have to be fairly active, and it makes a big difference because your network is the people you rely on, whether it's getting help right on the farm or talking through something or whatnot. That's been a game changer for us. And I'd say network's probably the biggest one to start kind of working on. But if you're looking at gardening and stuff like that, there's a lot more opportunities. You know, in an urban setting, you can do spin farming, which is kind of what Andrew was talking about with those Calgary farms. And they literally just go around and they rent out plots of like people's front or backyards. There's also opportunities to partner with landowners, you know, that don't know what they want to do with their land, and, you know, put a garden out there, or maybe it's a small herd of chickens or something like that. So there's lots of opportunities. It's just kind of networking and getting out there to kind of find out what they are. And yeah.
You raise an interesting point there that I'm almost hesitant to ask about, and feel free to decline, but the finances of regenerative farming, is it a viable practice? Because I feel like I've heard this common narrative that like, oh yeah, that's great on paper, like permaculture great on paper, but in practice it's not profitable relative to this industrial scale agriculture. How is it? What's your experience been in that realm, if you don't mind?
It's challenging, and a lot of it is changing the end consumer's perspective. A lot of people think that because it's direct from the farm, it should be cheaper than in the store because there's less steps to take to get there. When in fact, when you're a small scale producer, you know, say for meat, you are doing all those steps that, you know, commercially would be done in 5 different facilities. You're doing it all yourself, and you're not getting the volume discounts either. And so usually everything costs a lot more for the small producer. And then we are still trying to pay ourselves as well. Most days we don't make minimum wage. We're getting there. But we've had this chat a few times with a couple of friends, and a lot of the challenges is like when you're buying into a farm is you're up against multi-generational farms where they're not having to finance the same scale as you are. You know, we started from scratch. We had to get our own equipment. We had to get, you know, the land and all of that, you know, plus all the family site type of stuff. So there's definitely like big barriers that way. You know, but we needed the equipment for haying and for the cattle. So, you know, if you kind of scale that out, you're not requiring that. A lot of it depends on your market, who you're marketing to. And it's hard for just about everyone we know right now, whether they're more on your traditional commercial type processes or regenerative. Like everyone that's small is kind of in that same struggling. It's slim margins, but you know, if you're smart about it and you've got enough persistence, you know, you can get by. Not in it to get rich, that's for sure.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that we've shown that in the various ways that we've talked about how important it is today. And yeah, and there's so much heart in it. And if our local representatives were in the room, how can you ask them for support? And when we see that there's so many different benefits to regenerative farming, how do we sell that? And how do we scale that up?
Yeah, so the beginning of this year, our provincial government, they came out with the on-farm slaughter program, which has definitely been a big step in the right direction. There's definitely some fine tuning to it to make it a little more accessible. But what that does is it allows us to essentially slaughter the animal right on our farm. So it goes from, you know, one bad day to literally like a couple bad seconds, and that's it. So we're reducing the stress of the animal, which is a benefit to us. And then, you know, we're able to, you know, get rid of our time for travel and all that sort of stuff. There is some tweaking that needs to do specifically around the beef and the pork side of it to make it more accessible. Most families aren't going to buy a beef, let alone 6. And same with the pork. Like, it's not very common we sell a whole pig, or whole pig a little more, but still not that often. Same with the beef. We don't typically sell an entire beef to someone. So changing some of those restrictions. For poultry, we're actually, because we're non-quota and we are only seasonal, we're only allowed to sell directly to the customer. We can't be in retail. We can't sell to restaurants. So changing things like that to be a little more, we can reach a lot more channels for sales, as well as we're restricted in the number of chickens we're allowed to raise too. So there's also challenges. You've got a limit of what you're allowed to produce in a year. And when you're looking at these big poultry producers, like, sky's the limit for them. They're producing several thousand. We're producing less than 2,000. So you've got volume challenges that way. What was the question again? I went on a good tangent. How we're changing the structure. Those are kind of the main ones. It'd be nice to see some funding for egg tourism. I think bringing back like farm stores would be huge, and it also is able to tie together that narrative of food. People get to come to the farm and connect to actually like where it comes from, and I think that's really important, and we're starting to see a lot of them pop up. We're working on getting one set up as well for this winter. And then just, I think it would be great to get more stores focusing on local too, and trying to bring in, you know, more local produce. I know some of them do a fairly good job. A lot of the problem is with small producers is you can't produce enough of what these stores want. And same with restaurants. We've struggled with a few restaurants because they only want the best cuts of, say, a beef, and they want a lot of them. And it's, for small producers, it's not feasible. So there's kind of, shifts that need to be made in both like the retail market and the restaurant market, and then how people, you know, want to view their food and value their food. So, and the convenience, if we can learn how to, you know, use the whole food and marinate it ourselves instead of buying, you know, the pre-marinated steaks or the roasted chicken and stuff like that because of its convenience. Yeah. I don't know, anything to add?
No, I think you just about covered it.
All right.
And honestly, I'm sure that there's a lot more structural barriers that other farms experience and that just aren't coming to mind right now. Yeah, for sure. So Shada has a question here. A bit of a switch from the conversation. There are many barriers for people of lower social and economic status for accessing healthy organic foods. Do you have any perspectives and or existing program or program ideas on accessibility to healthy organic foods from farms such as yours? Thanks so much for sharing the farm today. Really enjoyed hearing about your regenerative farming from your perspective.
That's a great question. Thanks for asking that, Shada. and that's a challenging one, to be honest. One interesting thought someone had, I was at a conference actually in Montreal for Regeneration Canada, and it was regarding the CSA program and the funding structure of it, whereas it's more or less you pay what you can instead of there being a set amount. And ideally, more people pay extra that can cover the people that can't pay enough to meet like what you kind of have like as a break-even amount you need. So that would be one, which is kind of an interesting one. Having kind of a donation system of customers that would donate for shares that can be put towards additional CSAs for lower income families. We had a few people that donated CSA funds specifically to sign up families, and so we would deliver to those families, and it was covered by someone else.
Awesome.
So those are ones. I think it would be a great idea if the government could, you know, create, I don't know if it's subsidy is the right term to use, but some sort of a program where, you know, maybe a bunch of farms are able to register for that are part of the program, and then they receive the funding to then cover, not necessarily donating, but sending their food to people that need it but can't afford it. And so then the farm's costs are actually covered, and the people who need the healthy food actually have access to it.
That sounds awesome. And then we're helping the environment, and we're helping these people who are on low income, and we're also increasing their health and their well-being, which decreases stress on our healthcare system. Seems like a win-win all around.
Yeah, and then I know like a lot of times, like for people in those situations tend to work typically a lot more, but being able to grow their own food, even if it's small amounts, having, you know, pots of stuff in the house, you know, whether it's lettuce or whatnot and herbs, you know, every little bit does count. You know, maybe if they've got a house with a backyard, you know, apply for the chicken license and stuff like that. So I think there's options out there. It's just starting to get creative with them as well.
Yeah, it's challenging when, as you're saying, farmers are having such a hard time these days, and people on low income so much need what they have to offer, and yet you can't really ask from the farmers, and people on low income, as you say, don't necessarily have a lot of extra time to take care of those things themselves, and that is a no-win situation. There's like a no easy solution there, but I love when you, as you suggest, getting government involved. I think that's a fantastic role that government could play in that.
Well, and kind of going back to the comment I made earlier about, you know, cities, instead of having, you know, manicured parks and stuff, why don't we have food forests, you know, and planting vegetables and stuff like that? And it's kind of a, you know, help yourself system. If there's enough of those around the city, there's options. Yeah, totally.
Shalene asks, what is your favorite dish to prepare using the food you've grown?
There's
much
so
more
many.
like question.
And I'm not much help.
And I cook him dinner and I ask him what to eat. Nothing. I get nothing. Stonewall. I love making deviled eggs with our eggs. Fun note, don't hard boil fresh eggs. It doesn't peel well. You got to let them like sit in your fridge for 2 to 3 weeks and age a little bit.
Wow.
And they peel gloriously. But I love deviled eggs. I really like making chili with our ground beef. John makes a fantastic Swiss chard and potato smash, and it's really, really good. There's a lot. We are working on doing a recipe section on our website, so I'm trying to post like some of those really good favorite ones. Pumpkin pie from scratch, also my favorite. So
lots of favorites. Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions? Oh, here we go. Shada says, when can I come over for dinner? Yeah.
It will cost you doing chores in the evening, but you
Yeah.
know, anytime.
You have to chase turkeys with me.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I didn't ask related to what you do, in particular, anything that might be related to food waste that you might want to toss in there?
I think it's just really important for people to learn and understand where their food comes from and how it's grown. I always suggest like go out and meet your farmer. Most of them are pretty open to giving you tours. There's Alberta Open Farm Days, which happens every August too, and tons of farms open up to do just that. And then just really being cognizant of what you eat and put in your body and the amount of waste that it does produce, you know, the packaging and stuff, and start to question yourself and get curious. Don't be afraid to cook stuff from scratch. And, you know, if you are, there's Instagram and Facebook message. We get messaged all the time how to do boiled eggs. So yeah, literally.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, definitely the Alberta Open Farm Days has really like pushes the boundary of like between the rural and like urban centers, which don't communicate enough. And then, you know, people learn like why an egg is brown or white, for example, or just these simple things that lets them know that the food doesn't come from the shelf, it comes from a farm.
Love that. I think that's a great note to end on. And our webinars typically end with some live accordion music. So we will stop there as our last stop on the road. That's all. Thanks for joining us, Becky. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. Pleasure talking with both of you.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
us.
Thanks.